Welcome to This Daring Adventure podcast, where we work on bridging the gap between where we are and where we want to be in order to live a bigger and bolder life. In this podcast, we will provide inspiration, tips, and skills you need to make your life the adventure you want it to be. Here's your host, mindset mentor, and life coach, Trista Guertin.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of This Daring Adventure podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today for episode 17. I wanted to do this episode today on how to be an emotional adult because this is really the area, the subject that started my transformation about 5 or 6 years ago and began my journey into life coaching. And it really is a great illustration of how much power we have over ourselves and as individuals, and how much we are actually giving away. Most of us are living in emotional childhood, and I know that's what I was doing. And it means that we are reacting to the external circumstances in our lives. This could be your partner, your husband, or your wife. It could be your children. It could be your boss or your job. It could be the weather. It could be technology. It could be the economy. It could be politics. It could be where you live, the city or the country. And it could be money, whether you have it or not. And what happens is that we are blaming all of these circumstances for how we feel. And by doing so, we are making ourselves the victim. As you know, it makes us feel terrible. And we are basically giving away all of our power. It's not our fault, it's their fault. And if only it would change. If the weather was better, if the economy was stronger, if I had a better job, if my husband took out the trash, if my kids didn't fight. The reality is, though, we are always responsible for what we think, for what we feel, and what we do. And ultimately, we are responsible, therefore, for the results that we create in our life. We can decide. When we are children, our brains are still developing up until our mid-20s. Up until that point, they do not have the maturity or the sophistication or the ability to understand and analyze what we are thinking and what might be the consequences of our actions. Our brain does the best it can to process information and to help us act accordingly. Once our brain matures, then we do have the capacity to understand what we are thinking. And we then have the power to choose. We are responsible and we have a choice. Now, I know, especially when you might be learning this for the first time, it may not feel like you have a choice. But with practice, effort, skill, patience, we can develop greater awareness and become better at recognizing how we are showing up, what we are thinking, what we are feeling, and how that is creating the results in our lives. And therefore, then we can change and act accordingly. And I promise you, it is the most freeing experience you can ever have. It means that we are exercising self-responsibility. So therefore, we don't expect other people to make us happy. They do not have the ability to make us happy. And conversely, we do not have the ability to make them happy. They do not have the ability to make us feel secure or supported. That is our job. And we learn that we are the only ones who can hurt our feelings. And we hurt our feelings, or we allow ourselves to be hurt because of what we're thinking. Somebody may do something or say something, and then we interpret it in a way that causes us to feel either disappointed or sad or hurt, angry, whatever it may be. As an emotional adult, though, we take responsibility for how we feel, always. And it doesn't matter what someone else does or doesn't do or say. We don't give anyone the power over our emotional lives. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, this is how I came to life coaching. I was listening to an episode of the Life Coach School podcast on emotional adulthood. And at the time, I was going through a difficult period with my now ex-partner. And I was quite upset, and I was looking for some sort of relief. I knew I couldn't continue on in that state any longer. And as I listened to that episode, what I learned was that it didn't matter what he did or what he didn't do, what he said or what he didn't say, and that I had the responsibility to make myself happy. Prior to that, there was a lot of drama. There were a lot of ups and downs. There's a lot of sadness and frustration and disappointment. I also learned that as an adult, we have the ability to do whatever it is we want. And that we can't control other people. We cannot change them. We can only have control over what we do and what we say and what we feel and think. And that other people will do and say and think and feel whatever it is they want. It doesn't mean that there won't be consequences. But at the end of the day, I cannot control someone else. And therefore, every time I have expectations about what someone else should do or shouldn't do, I am setting myself up for disappointment and happiness, frustration. Understanding that they can do whatever they want and that I don't have to tie my emotions to their behavior is freeing. It doesn't mean that I don't make requests. I can, but it just means that I don't get happy or sad or disappointed or frustrated if they're not honored. I can have boundaries. I can choose how I want to respond to certain situations. It's not about ultimatums, but it's about knowing what is acceptable to me, but not tying my emotions to whether it happens or not. I am in charge. And even now, I sometimes forget. It's easy to react in the moment when something happens. But I'm getting better at recognizing this and having greater awareness around it and then course correcting. It's okay. And I can have compassion for myself and for others and understanding and knowing that I have a human brain so that this is going to be a condition that I experience for the rest of my life. As long as you have a human brain, things are going to happen. It's going to react in a certain way, but you can't become better. And it does happen less frequently. So I take responsibility for everything I feel, I say, I do, for the decisions I make, and for how I show up. It's never the fault of anyone else for what I say or what I do or how I show up. And I can become aware of how I'm thinking and feeling and recognize that this is creating my experience, not the external events. I have become empowered to make choices about then how I want to show up and how I want to feel. It's my responsibility. And I will take action in order to create the results that I want, regardless of what's going on around me. Because I know when I don't, I'm giving away my power. And I act out, I will yell, I will have temper tantrums, whatever it is. I also tell a story about the driving in the Middle East and how crazy it is. And I was in northern Lebanon and just driving 6 kilometers to the office each day. And I would be so upset by the time I got there because of the behavior of the other drivers. They drove every which way, backwards, forwards, up, down, sideways. It didn't matter. There were no brake lights. There were no signaling. There were no traffic cops. There were no street lights or traffic lights. And I would get so upset. And I finally realized that I was giving away all my power to these drivers who would cut me off and then go merrily on their way, and they didn't care. But I was the one who was getting upset and feeling terrible and stressed out. And there was no need for it. Yeah, they were driving terribly. Okay. But every time I tried to argue with reality that it should be different and that they shouldn't have done what they did, I was feeling awful and stressed out. And it was affecting me. And I just decided that I didn't want to feel that way anymore. I stopped blaming others for how I was feeling. It was not the other drivers that were making me feel terrible. It wasn't the lack of traffic lights that was stressing me out. It was my decision, right? And so I had the choice as to whether I wanted to honk my horn and yell at them and generally act like a toddler when I was driving or not. And I could just relax and get to work in a calmer state if I wanted to. That was not the responsibility for anybody else on the roads. It was mine. It's my job to make me happy. It's my job to keep me calm. And so, regardless of what anyone else says or doesn't do, only affects me as much as I allow it to. And I recognize that when I do allow circumstances or other people to affect me, it's disempowering. And I'm making myself the victim. I've learned that nobody else can meet my needs, that's completely my job. Right? Most people are so busy trying to meet their own needs and make themselves happy. They don't have the ability to do that for me. I have to do that for myself. And so when we have a relationship, regardless of whom it's with, we can come together and just love and grow and enjoy each other's company. My partner does not make me happy. It's not his job. It's my job. So you will not complete me. You will not make me whole. Sorry, Jerry Maguire. I am completely responsible for all of those things. We are somehow raised to believe that this is possible, that someone else can make us happy, someone else can complete us, someone else can make us whole. But it's not true. It's never been true. It just makes for a great movie. It's also important to remember that even though I am responsible for how I feel and that I'm not responsible for how someone else feels, it doesn't mean I show up and act out and be unkind or not considerate of them. It just means that I don't try and control the behavior of the others. I still want to show up in the best way that I can. I still want to show up authentically and honestly and as kind as I can. I might make mistakes and I might take actions or say something that I might later regret, and that's okay. I can apologize and I can understand how I own that and it's my responsibility for my behavior. But I don't expect myself to be perfect. And I can accept the apology of someone else who maybe shows up and says something that they didn't want to. So can you identify areas in your life where you are acting out of emotional childhood? What or who are you blaming? Where are you making yourself the victim? How are you making others responsible for your emotions? If you can start to identify those areas, then you can start to take your power back. And you will start to feel freer and lighter. Remember, you can choose. You can choose what you want to think. You can choose how you want to feel. You are responsible for how you feel, always. You do not need to be a victim unless you choose to be. No one else can make you happy. That's your job. Remember that you can choose how you want to show up and what you want to think and how you want to feel. In fact, you are responsible for your own feelings, always. You never have to be a victim. No one can make you happy. You are responsible for your own happiness, and you cannot make someone else happy. Adults can act as they choose. It doesn't mean that there won't be consequences, but you cannot change someone. And tying your emotional life to how someone else shows up, what they think, what they say, what they do, keeps you disempowered. But if you're in emotional adulthood, then it is empowering and it is freeing. It helps us to move through life more at ease, calmer, and with a greater sense of peace. And once you experience this difference, you'll be unbelievably glad that you did. That's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have a moment to rate, review, share, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, I would greatly appreciate it. It helps me to reach a broader audience. I wish you all the best for 2023. Good health, happiness, and I look forward to talking to you throughout the next year as we continue on this amazing, daring adventure together. Thanks, everybody. Happy New Year. Take care. See you in 2023.
Thank you for listening to this Daring Adventure podcast with your host, Trista Guertin. We hope you enjoyed the tips and conversations on how to get excited about life again. As always, you can head to tristaguertin.com for additional resources and to book a one-on-one coaching session. You can also follow Trista on Instagram at Trista V. Guertin. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.